Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et toutes, et bienvenue à cet événement très spécial. My name is Christopher Manfredi, and at least for the next 48 hours, I'm the interim principal and vice chancellor at McGill University, and then I'll be returning to my regularly scheduled programming as provost and vice principal academic. I'd like to begin, of course, by acknowledging that McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks the territory on which peoples of the world now gather. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second annual Principals Lecture. We're delighted to have with us our two cohorts of MMSM scholars, finalist award recipients, and regional award recipients, along with members of the wider McGill community. In the midst of the turbulence and related uncertainties that are unfolding globally in recent times, we are fortunate to benefit from the perspective shared by today's esteemed speakers, the Honorable Bob Rae and Professor Jennifer Welsh. Together, they will explore the future of global governance and the pressing need for collective action to address some of the world's most difficult challenges. And I have to say, if their last exchange back in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic is any indication, we're in for a truly excellent discussion. It's now my privilege to introduce our speakers, beginning with Mr. Bob Rae, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York. To this role, Mr. Rae brings the experience of a long and prolific career in Canadian politics, having been elected into federal and provincial parliaments 11 times between 1978 and 2013, and notably serving as Premier of Ontario from 1990 to 1995. In 2017, he was appointed as Canada's Special Envoy to Myanmar and was later named Canada's Special Envoy on Humanitarian and Refugee Issues in 2020. In addition to his career in politics, Ambassador Rae has also worked in various times in private law. He has served, for example, as a partner and senior counsel to the law firm OKT LLP, specializing in Indigenous law and constitutional issues, and has also taught law and public policy at the University of Toronto. Ambassador Rae is a Privy Councillor, a Companion of the Order of Canada, a member of the Order of Ontario, and has received numerous awards and honorary degrees from institutions in Canada and around the world. He holds an Honours Bachelor of Arts from the University of Toronto, a Master's degree from Oxford University, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar, and is a graduate of the University of Toronto's Faculty of Law. Given his long-spanning dedication to public service and his remarkable track record, we are greatly appreciative that Ambassador Rae has agreed to give the second annual Principals Lecture. Merci à Monsieur Rae d'être des nôtres aujourd'hui. C'est un grand honneur de vous accueillir. Joining Mr. Rae in conversation is McGill's own Professor Jennifer Welsh, Canada 150 Research Chair in Global Governance and Security and Director of the Centre for International Peace and Security Studies. An internationally recognized expert in her field, Professor Welsh has published prolifically on topics such as humanitarian intervention, the UN Security Council, and Canadian foreign policy. Prior to joining McGill, Professor Welsh was a professor and chair in international relations at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, and a professor in international relations at the University of Oxford. From 2013 to 2016, she served as a special advisor to the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the responsibility to protect. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Saskatchewan, as well as a Master's and Doctorate from the University of Oxford, where she too studied as a Rhodes Scholar. Notre université et nos boursiers sont privilégiés de pouvoir compter sur l'expérience et l'expertise de Professeur Welsh. Merci de votre présence aujourd'hui. Sans plus tarder, je cède la parole à nos invités pour cet échange qui s'annonce des plus intéressants. Thank you and enjoy the lecture.
Good morning. It's great to be here with all of you. Thanks for filling the room for this conversation. I'm particularly pleased that we have so many McCall-McBain scholars with us this morning. And it's such an honor and pleasure to be able to lead a discussion with Ambassador Rae, whose very long and distinguished career, being elected 11 times as a politician, is itself amazing, but also the different roles he's played in key international issues for Canada. And so I wanted to start with the big picture, if I can. If we think about Canada's population, its geography, the structure of its economy, it heavily depends on the broader global context. And for much of the post-1945 period, that context was pretty favorable to our interests and to our values. We were able to, at certain moments, project our values pretty effectively. We benefited materially from the structure of the global economy, and we were able as well to benefit from a set of security relationships and institutions that largely protected us from the existential threats that touched us in the first part of the 20th century. But I think we can all agree that the last decade and a half has seen political, economic, technological, ecological changes that are creating an environment that is perhaps more challenging to Canada's interests and values than at any time since 1945. And so I want to begin with a big question for you, and that is, how do you describe the nature of that environment, and what does it mean for you as one of Canada's top diplomats?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to come to the university and to share some time with all of you. It's a real pleasure, and it's particularly great to be able to listen and learn with Professor Welsh, who really is one of Canada's great minds and thinkers and doers on Canada's international relations and what's going on in the world. This job has been great because in 1 week I get to have a conversation with Margaret Macmillan, which I had on Monday evening in front of 300 people in Toronto, and have another one a couple of days later with Jennifer. It's really very, very special to be able to do that. But let me try and answer your question, which is a really good and difficult question. I think you rightly described the way the world is changing. As I see it, I regard the periods of great stability in global history as the exception and not the rule. Some of you may know of a famous quotation, which I don't have in front of me, which I should have, from Keynes, where in the Economic Consequences of the Peace, which, by the way, if you read nothing else by Keynes, you should really read that, which is a great book because it's short and you can really understand a lot of what he's thinking about. And in that book, he describes how before the First World War, there was a period of global, what appeared to be global stability and global increased global trade, and the passage that I'm referring to talks about how if you were a business person in London, you could wake up in the morning and read your paper and get news from all over the world and understand what was going on. You could quietly, have your cup of tea, which would be made in Ceylon or in India, and you were relating to. Anyway, it's a whole passage where he waxes eloquent on, how great this period of global stability was. But the whole purpose of why he was saying it was that was totally blown up, literally blown up in World War I. And we then entered the dark valley, as Piers Brendan has called it, the period between 1920 and 1940, and then into the period of the Second World War with even more destruction. So the period after the Second World War was kind of like, that was when the UN was founded, the UN was created. It was a period when people thought, well, that's over, and now we can get back to the stability. And I think what we're coming to terms with now, and certainly the last year has really brought this home to all of us, is how dramatically unstable much of the world is, and how challenging it is to make your way in this world. It's not easy. It's difficult, and I think you're quite rightly describing, Jennifer, why this is particularly challenging for Canada. We're quite vulnerable. We're a country of roughly 40 million people, which is, large, but not huge. We're not a great power. We're not a rule maker. We're a rule taker in trade terms. And so when the world trading system is less free, less rules-based, more arbitrary, more subject to the whims of major powers, it's challenging for Canada. It's very difficult for us, and we've been in a long-standing trade dispute with the United States, which has gone on for 35 years, which has worked to the great disadvantage of our forestry industry, which employs hundreds of thousands of people across the country. But that's just one example. I mean, we've had to deal with, well, what do we do about China? How do we connect with that country and that regime, which is going through its own internal changes and making a dramatic difference? I think the big picture in New York, in the UN, is, I always say that you've got to come in with a sense that we've gone from 52 countries to 193 countries. And we've gone from a period where the stability that was in the world was largely created by the force of empires. And now those empires have had to retreat. And we've had a period of steady decolonization and rapid growth of new sovereign nations into the fold, coming into the assembly, coming into the General Assembly and into the United Nations with a deep sense of grievance, of historical grievance, a sense that life is not fair, life has been unequal, they've been subject to the powers of other people, and now they're having to make their way into this new world, and it's challenging. And I start from that premise. And then we look at what are the forces that have created even greater instability. Well, we've seen in the last while, I think we went through a period from roughly 1945 to probably 1975, 1980, where it looked as if we'd really hit the sweet spot, where there was prosperity that was growing, and we saw it in Canada. It was creating more prosperity for more people. And so people would take a very positive view of this and say, wow, this is great. We're doing much better. But then in Canada and the United States and elsewhere, we begin to see an uncoupling between prosperity and equality. We begin to see greater inequality. And actually, Minister Freeland wrote about this in her book on plutocrats before she became the Minister of Finance, which might explain why she raised taxes on people making a little bit more money. I think she's still got that sense that that's something we need to pay attention to. And globally, we see the same thing. You can see a growth in the middle class in a number of countries, China, India, elsewhere, but also dramatic shifting in many, many countries from rural to urban on a massive basis, more and more displacement, more people internally displaced, more refugees than we've seen since the end of the Second World War, and a greater degree of inequality than we've seen, although there's still been a lot of better times, but we're not getting close to meeting the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, which is a big preoccupation at the UN. Then came the pandemic, which had a dramatic decoupling effect, I would argue. It forced all governments to look inwards, to look at their own citizens, to respond to an absolutely clear demand from the public that their governments pay attention to them and deal with them first. So it wasn't just America first, it was Canada first, it was UK first, it was Europe. I mean, this was a growing reality. And therefore, if you were outside that frame, you didn't get access to vaccines. And I think it's been difficult for me to try to convey to my capital how deeply angry this has made a lot of people in a lot of countries, that they felt they had not been included in the fight in a fair way, and that they've been heavily impacted by it because of the impact of the pandemic on the global economy and on national economies around the world. Then there's the underlying force of climate change, which is huge, and it has a huge ongoing impact on people. And finally, we have the continuation of wars of aggression. I say continuation because they never really ended, but the UN was formed to save future generations from the scourge of war. which is the phrase that is in the charter, in the preamble. And that hasn't happened. We haven't saved future generations from the scourge of war. They're still suffering from the scourge of war. And many of the conflicts are internal, not just between nations, but within nations. And the challenge facing the UN and anybody is to how do we deal with the extent of the conflict. Sometimes it subsides, but now with the war of aggression in Ukraine, we're into a new ball game. And with the prospect of further aggression in the South China Sea, affecting China, Taiwan, and ongoing Israel-Palestine, Central Africa, go down the list of places where there have been conflicts that just have not been brought to a conclusion over a long, long period of time, and they create enormous instability. And the one thing we've seen with respect to the Russian aggression in Ukraine is that it has created a global economic slowdown and huge challenge for some countries rather than others. So that's a rather long answer to your question, but I think it's when you say how do I see things, that's sort of very much what impacts me. And I have to say my final concern is, although you're right when you say that we rely tremendously on world trade, we are an open nation, we're very much in the world and of the world. I think it's still an underlying challenge for governments to spend as much time as they need to, in my view, on global issues. Mm-hmm. And if you look at our budgets, for example, the last several budgets have been intensely preoccupied with the national economy within a national context. And it's sometimes difficult to get your oar in and say, well, yeah, but we've got to figure out what some of the global impacts of the last 10 years have really been, and how do we make sure that we're playing our part in dealing with that. So
I want to come back to Ukraine, and I want to come back to the pandemic and its aftermath. But first, I just want to ask a slightly more personal question, and that is, given the grievance that you talked about, that you see in the UN system, and given the polarization, this requires a very particular approach to engaging multilaterally. And how would you describe your approach as a diplomat, your way of managing that polarization and that grievance? How does it affect you in the way you operate as a diplomat?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I started doing this job, in the first month or so, I felt so much at home, because my life was a little different than even the biography expresses. My dad was a diplomat. I traveled with my parents, mainly with them. I traveled in North America and in Europe, but I went to an international school as a kid, as a teenager. I did my high school in the very hard knock school of the International School in Geneva, Switzerland. Very tough environment to really have to deal with that. And so when I came to Canada to go to university, I was very self-conscious of the fact that I was that I didn't know most of the TV shows in the 60s. I was not subject to them. I had to go through a crash course in sort of Canadian culture, hockey teams, baseball teams, what was going on. And I was very aware of being a little bit of an outsider. And then I went to Oxford, came back to go to law school, and finally went into Canadian politics. And I think part of my journey in becoming a provincial politician in particular was to say, well, no, this is my, I'm here again, and I'm making this my base and my place. But I always had what Bill Graham has called in his autobiography called the call of the world. There's always been the call of the world in my back of my head, saying you've got to think about all that stuff. So when I get on the floor of the UN, and you are on the floor of 193 countries, those who haven't been in the General Assembly, it's a huge, magnificent room, and the delegates are all around from all over, and immediately you look around and you say, well, this is a place where not everybody looks like me. and where you realize you've got to listen. The first thing you got to do is listen to what is the call of the world? What are people saying? And the General Assembly is sort of the hall of grievances. It's kind of a place where people come and complain about what's going on. And you have to listen to the complaints. And many of them are totally legitimate. Some of them are not, but many of them are. And so there's a combination of things. One is the political skills which I developed, I hope, over a long period of time, allows you to listen and also to engage and to try to break through the formality. And there's good things about it sounds strange, but good things about the UN is that as soon as you get there, you're very welcome into the environment. It doesn't really matter. You got to be pretty odd duck not to be welcome because we have a WhatsApp group of diplomats. All the PRs, we have our own WhatsApp group, and everybody's called by their first name or luckily I don't have a nickname, but it's very informal. And you're immediately introduced, and immediately, because everybody only stays for 4 or 5 years, you know you're going to be there for a while, and then you're not going to be there. So we try to make it as welcoming as possible. So from that point of view, it's a kind of unique culture, and I'm known now as, I think it's fair to say, as somebody, I communicate a lot on social media. For those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, I mean, Elon Musk is making my algorithms a little crazy, but I still spend a morning trying to get my news from around the world and also communicate a bit. I do a lot of that stuff in public, and I also do a lot of my speaking more informally than most other ambassadors. I don't use notes unless I have to, unless I'm really instructed saying, you have to read this, and then I say, but can I say something else? They said, yeah, but only a little bit, don't overdo it. You really got to read this. And so there's also, through my, I guess, watching my father and learning from him, and he was my first teacher, I'd have to say, because he used to take me into work. He used to take me with him to work. I used to go to watch the meetings at the UN in Geneva. He wanted me to sit and listen at that time in my life, which was, as a teenager, listening is not always your greatest skill, and also understand the importance of private conversation and of respecting confidences and understanding that there's some things you can say under the cone of silence or under the Chatham House rules or whatever you want to call it. And so you tend to pick up. And sometimes reporters will say to me, well, do you ever speak to the Russian ambassador? I'll say, of course. I'm not going to tell you what he says or what I say, but of course I do. I speak to the Iranian ambassador. I speak to people from all over. We don't agree with each other, but there has to be a way, a place. And one thing about the UN, that for all of its weaknesses, is it's a place where everybody is there. Sometimes people will say to me now, well, don't you think the Russians should be thrown out? And I say, no, not from the UN. No, you can throw them off the status of women, you throw the Iranians off the status of women committee, and we can do other things on the human rights committees and other things. But when it comes to the General Assembly and being present in the room and in the place, everybody needs to be there. Everybody needs to be there. And I think that's a very important part of what the UN represents.
So just thinking back to a year ago in the General Assembly, and for those of you who didn't see it or listen to it, I encourage you to listen to Ambassador Rae's speech from early March of 2022 on the resolution that was condemning Russia's actions. Within the GA, there was this overwhelming vote in condemnation. But I hear from my students, and I hear from others, that these are words and not deeds. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about why it's important for Canada's voice to be heard in that way, in that chamber, on moments like that.
Well, first of all, I think the criticism is fair enough. I mean, it is a frustration of life that there's a difference between talking and doing. And doing, it requires collective action and requires clear steps being taken by governments and other things, and there's a difference between that and somebody making an argument or making a case. I do think that the Russian aggression is truly appalling, and that it is a breach of every principle of the United Nations in terms of how it was done, how it's taking place, the impact on civilians, the impact on families, the creation of millions of refugees, the cost, and not only the insensitivity of President Putin, but the deliberateness of what he's done, and the attempts through the clumsiest of propaganda techniques to try to pretend that it's not happening, is something that has to be called out. And so we do that. That's part of what I was asked to do when I took on this job. They said, we want you to use the UN as a platform from which we can express clearly what our principles of our public policy are. Now, there's always, every time you say something, you realize that, first of all, you're going to make some people angry, and secondly, people are going to say, well, what about us? What about our situation? And I can remember the ambassador from the Congo stopping me as I was walking away from my chair, and he said, "Vous n'avez pas parlé pas du tout d'une guerre civile en Afrique qui a duré depuis des années." And I listened to him, and I said, we've got to talk more about that. Come and let's have lunch together, and we'll talk about it. And since then, I've started a number of conversations with to understand better where conflicts are deep-seated and how they often don't get the attention and the publicity and the focus from the media or from anybody else that says, well, this is why we have. And there are millions of displaced people in the Congo and in other parts of Africa where there have been a series of wars within countries and between countries that have gone on for the longest time, and it has not received the attention it deserves. We have UN missions, we have UN peacekeeping, but none of it is effective, has proven to be as effective as we would like it to be. So I'm very self-conscious about the fact that, you say this about that, but on the other hand, if we had not said something clear and unequivocal about Ukraine, I think we would have failed the moment. And we had to meet up. We had to meet that moment. Do we have to meet other moments? Yes. And I'll say without apology that many of my battles are fought in private in Ottawa. They're not in public at the UN, because that's part of what an ambassador has to do, is convince others that we've got to do more in this area.
And Canada is contributing in many different ways through its immigration policy, that it's changed its approach to refugees, its financial assistance, which was increased in the budget earlier this week. But I want to acknowledge the concern of some Canadians who worry that it seems that the country's response to the war involves, the supply of weapons, which in the view of some prolongs the fighting. And those who begin to talk about peace in this war, or about the need to contemplate the parameters for negotiation, have sometimes been criticized as contributing to a kind of environment of appeasement, that we might end up acknowledging some of Russia's gains. But we know from history that wars can end roughly three ways, right? You can have victory by one side, and with the withdrawal of forces, which we know this is what President Zelensky is asking for. We can have negotiation when there is a kind of herding stalemate, as we say in my field. Or we can have this kind of unstable situation where conflict remains unresolved and there's neither war nor peace, right? How do you think about these scenarios? And do you think diplomats, those in the profession of diplomacy, have a responsibility to talk about negotiation?
Well, I think, I was actually called in by Minister Freeland at the beginning of the war to have an ongoing discussion with the Ukrainian. At that time, they had a negotiating team they were meeting with the Russians. It was quite remarkable. They were still meeting with the Russians even as the Russian troops were coming across from Belarus into Kiev or towards Kiev, and were, as you know, they were stopped and had to go back. But for about 6 or 8 weeks, the Russians and the Ukrainians were talking. And my view was then, and it still is now, is that if the Ukrainians want to talk about anything with the Russians, that's up to them. I mean, it's not something that any of us should have opinions as to why they're doing it or not doing it. They will have to weigh the benefits of conversations and the costs of those conversations or the relevance of them. Eventually, those talks came to an end because the Ukrainians felt, and I think there was, based on what I had seen of the give and no take, or take and no give from the Russians, that the Russians were not looking for a reasonable prospect of a settlement. They were looking for a surrender. And but at the same time, President Zelensky has said very clearly, publicly in the last few days, I said, well, President Xi wants to be a mediator. I'd like to see him. Why doesn't he come and see me? He was talking to everybody else. Why doesn't he talk to me? Which is a perfectly reasonable question that I would ask of anybody who wants to be a mediator. It's pretty strange to put out a peace plan and talk to one side and not talk to the other side. I mean, that's a little odd. Maybe that'll change. We don't know. I think, however, Jennifer, I think there is a problem at the moment with expecting, knowing what the Russian position has been, and there's no indication that it's changing, that this is something that they're going to want to do with the Russians. I think we have to be very careful about thinking what an eventual agreement could look like, and I don't. My own view is that President Kennedy once said, "You should never fear to negotiate, and you should never negotiate out of fear." And I don't think we should be asking the Ukrainians to negotiate out of fear. And I think that's the right position at the moment. But do I and do others think and talk about how could things change? What would it take to get to a different place? All the time. But it's not something I do in public because it's not particularly helpful. My own sense is that the next few weeks and months of the war are going to be extremely critical. And I do think that, and I think that's a widespread view, that there will be some greater conflict through the spring and into the summer. And I think people will then try and have a sense of, well, what is that? Yeah. What does that now mean?
And do you worry about escalation? About why?
I think things have already escalated. I mean, I don't want to say I don't worry about escalation, or don't worry. There's nothing to fear. There's always these situations are always difficult, but I think that there are two ways in which escalation we talk about. One would be escalation into other fronts of the war, or other attacks from the Russians on other countries. I think that's extremely unlikely because any one of those attacks would involve an immediate response from NATO. And I can't conceive, even of Putin, thinking that a launching any kind of a nuclear confrontation, even though it might be called tactical, which is a total misnomer, would be in anyone's interest, or particularly would not be in his interest. I can't think of anything that would bring a dramatic change in the life of Russians. Anything more that would do that than launching that kind of a confrontation.
I'd love to keep talking about Ukraine, but there's a couple of other...
Sure there are, of course.
There's a couple of other situations I want to put on the table. So one is a situation in our own hemisphere, which we've had a chance to talk about before, the situation in Haiti. We're also living in an era in which the impact of decades of Western-led interventions has made the governments of Western states, but also local populations who have experienced various forms of intervention, very wary of that model. And yet we know that the United States, if the press is correct, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, has been pressuring Canada to consider leading some kind of mission to Haiti, in the belief that without some international involvement, it's really unlikely that the situation will stabilize. So at the moment, looking back at the visit last week of the US president, our decision has been to support with more financial resources the Haitian police. So can you unpack that decision for us, but also what does this episode also tell us about the Canadian-American relationship?
Yes, I'll do my best to, without losing my job, to tell you a bit about what's going on. And the first is that I actually think it's a not right to describe the American position as one of putting pressure on Canada. I don't think that's true. And if anybody would have felt the pressure, I think I would have. I would have felt that at some different points in meetings that I've had in Washington and in New York and in Haiti. I think the pressure on all of us is because of the terrible situation in Haiti. The situation in Haiti is genuinely terrible for people. The gangs have taken control of most of Port-au-Prince, and in so doing, they kidnap people, they kill people, they rape women, they make it impossible for people to carry on their daily lives, and as a result, people are not able to get access to food and to water, and I mean it's awful. It's a horrible situation, and in the face of that, the Haitian government, such as it is, and it's important to stress that, there's no elected government in Haiti. There's an appointed government that there haven't been any elections in Haiti for a very, very long time. And the Secretary General of the UN have said publicly, they've written letters saying, please, let's have a rapid action force. We need a military intervention, da-da-da-da. And really what we've been doing as a country is to say, well, exactly how do you think that's going to work? And
let's play this out.
Let's play this out. And so you'll hear me say this in other occasions, but I'll say it again. I think one of the things that you learn in life is there's a difference between consequential thinking and impulsive thinking. It seems kind of obvious, but impulsive thinking is reactive, it's emotional, there's a terrible injustice, you have to do this, you must respond, and you say, yeah, okay. And my favorite example of this in one brief 2-week period was to have two conversations I had with two Israeli leaders. One of them was President Peres, as he then was, and the other one was with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu was the first meeting I had, and he said, Iran is an existential threat to Israel. We cannot go on like this. Something has to give. Something must happen. I kept on asking him about the Palestinians, and he said, no, that's not a big issue. What the big issue is Iran. That's the issue we've got to deal with. So when Peres came to see me, and I was interim leader of the party in Ottawa, I met with President Peres. I said, President Peres, and I knew him better than I knew Netanyahu. And I said, Shimon, tell me, what do you think of this view of Netanyahu that says that we simply have to intervene in Iran, which means bombing Iran in order to deal with nuclear threat? He said, so what would you do on the second day? What would you do the day after? What would that consequence be? And then how would you respond that way? And when you meet President Peres, a classic example of what I would call a consequential thinker. Oh, that's interesting. What would be the next thing? What would be the next move? And his consequential thing he said was Israel should not do anything without what we do in partnership with others, including Canada, including the United States, including others. And we can't do this on our own. It's not something that we do by ourselves. And I think that's very, very true of thinking about Haiti. I mean, I believe the situation is hugely serious and critical. I also think that, and you're the expert, but tell me if I'm wrong. Well, actually, don't.
I'll only think
No,
it if
no, you can think it. The first duty to protect is from the authorities in the country.
It is.
And that's the first duty. And so when countries say, please help me do this, you say, well, you have to start doing it yourself. And Haiti has an army of only 600 people, very tiny army for all sorts of historical reasons, and a police force of several thousand. However, the size of the police force is still the subject of considerable debate because many have left and are not responding to the call. And what we believe and what we have been told and what the evidence would suggest is that the gang activity is actually quite carefully monitored and directed by a range of political actors and elite businesses and others, some of whom are based in Haiti, some of whom have left Haiti but are still actively engaged in directing the affairs of the country. There's a huge traffic of weapons that's coming from Miami. There's a huge traffic in drugs that comes up from Latin America, up through Haiti into North America. And you say, if we just intervene and solve this problem temporarily, if we could do that, then at some point we would have to leave, and then what would there be in its place, and what would stop it from going back to being just as bad, if not worse, than it was before? So that's what leads us to say, really, let's talk first of all about what have you got on the ground that can help you to engage and disrupt the gangs. What is it that's stopping you from doing this? We've now got a list of sanctions of up over 20. No other country, including the United States, has a number that's even close to that. The Americans have a job to do, in my view, of dealing with the flow of arms from Miami. And I won't get into a discussion on gun control in the United States, but it is obviously a critical issue. But when it has such an impact on another country, it's something you really have to deal with. So it's not that, I mean, one of the things the Prime Minister has said, which I think is very important, he said it last week, and I think it's a very, very strong statement on his part, and it's true. He said, look, we are not walking away from this conflict, from this challenging moment. We are going to work hand in hand, arm in arm, with the authorities in Haiti that want to deal seriously with the criminal problem in Haiti. We are committed to doing that. And we will keep on finding ways to do that. It's not just sending money. No. We're providing other forms of assistance, including training, including additional support in terms of looking at, well, tell us what your plans are, and we can get some other experts to come in and talk about what more can be done. How do we deal with this kind of activity? And quite honestly, as opposed to sending in thousands of soldiers who would come in, try and deal with the problem, I mean, the military is not necessarily equipped to deal with gang activity and gang violence. It's a different set of skills that are required, so we've got to look at what that is exactly. And I know it's very frustrating. I mean, the Haitian people say, we're really mad you're not engaging with us. Then there's another group that say, we're really mad you're engaging too much. And you say, we're just trying to help get onto some path that resembles stability, democracy, and a better way of life for the Haitian people.
And national capacity
is essential to do that, and to build a capacity to do that is essential. And I think that's the approach that we're taking. Having said all of that, if somebody said, well, is that it? And you say, it depends. It depends on what's happening on the ground. It depends on what else needs to be done. But if you say, are we rushing in? No, we're not going to rush in. But we're certainly not walking away either. And I think that's a hard road to walk, because we're saying doesn't lend itself to these
Yeah.
simple, snap answers.
Yeah.
But it's tough. And don't forget, the movement of population in the Americas is now huge.
Yeah.
Out of Venezuela, 6 million people, 6 million refugees came. If I'd come to this class 10 years ago or 8 years ago and said, keep your eye on Venezuela, that place is going to blow, there's going to be 6 million refugees, people would have said, what's he talking about? But the level of displacement and movement in all of Latin America is huge. There are 250,000 people who crossed the border from Colombia to Panama, walked through the jungle, are met then by the Panamanians, put them in buses. Oh, guess what? Send them up to the border of Costa Rica, and then up through Nicaragua, and then up through Guatemala, and then up through Mexico. So that's a huge movement of people that's going on. And it wasn't so long ago that everybody thought, oh, Latin America, well, they're all becoming kind of liberal capitalists, and it's all very stable now, and it's all good. You say, no, it's not the way the world is. It's actually not that stable, and that's why I say that the notion that somehow liberal stability is, reigns supreme. It's just we got to get back to that normality. It's not that easy. There are things that are happening that are creating tremendous amounts of instability and a lot of movement of people, and we have to figure out what we think about that and also how we can work together with countries to try to improve the situation. But you've got to look at it square in the face and say, this is the challenge we're facing.
Very good example of consequential thinking. So you mentioned Israel. I want to come back to that. Because what's going on in Israel at the moment is really testing Canada's values. We know that for some Western countries, I'm thinking here particularly of Germany, but also to a certain extent the United States, there's been a great deal of reluctance to speak out against developments in Israel. And some commentators, I think in Canada, also believe our response has been too meek. So what do you believe we need to say and do regarding developments in Israel? Just a little easy question there for you.
Well, I thought you would ask that question, so
Funny you should
I've been
ask
thinking
that.
about it, and I'm actually not uncomfortable talking about it at all. I've had the opportunity to travel in the Middle East, Israel, the West Bank, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, many times over the last 25 years in my work with the former federations. We did a lot of work on those kinds of the issues that are underlying in the whole region, but also in Israel, Palestine. And so, I mean, my own personal position is not something I can pretend is exact. I mean, I have a right. I have my own opinions, but I also have to express clearly the opinions of the government of Canada. I think the position that we've taken has been consistent, but I also think we constantly need to say, yeah, that's the position that we've taken, but how are things actually happening on the ground, and how relevant are we to that conversation at the moment? So let me just say a couple of things. One is, going back to the period between 1945 and 1957, Canada was very clear at the time of the end of the British Mandate, which was one of the first issues that landed like a hot potato in the beginning of the UN in 1945. And actually, Justice Rand was a member of the committee that was set up by the UN to look at what do we do with the British Mandate, because the British Mandate was Palestine, and now what do we do? And Canada cast a vote in favor at that time, in favor of what was called in the resolution in 1947, 2 states for 2 peoples. which was the resolution that was passed. Now, that approach was rejected by the Arab population, the Arab countries in the region. And I think that was the right position then, and it's the right position now. I think the challenge that we face is that the dynamics on the ground have completely changed in terms of where people live and the views that people express. But that I keep going back to that point, because when you read the biography of Justice Rand and you read the historical analysis of what happened in those days, it's very, very important to realize that Canada's position was that both populations needed to have their place and needed to have a home. And that should be the direction of our policy. It's still the direction of our policy today. So when an Israeli minister says, as one of them said earlier last week I guess it was, the Minister of Finance said in a talk that he gave in Paris, he said there's no such thing as Palestinian people. He's wrong. And he's not just wrong, what he's saying is actually dangerous. It's just as dangerous as Hamas saying the Zionist entity has no future in the region. You say, well, first of all, don't call it the Zionist entity. It's a country called Israel, which is a member of the United Nations and has been since 1948. But so the extremes on both sides have rejected the notion of two states for two peoples. But in the rejection of the other, you end up only creating the basis for conflict. Israel's internal challenges are things that traditionally we don't go around. I mean, during the whole Trump era, we didn't say a whole hell of a lot about what Trump was saying or doing about the United States. It was our neighbor. It's not because we didn't have opinions. It's because I'm not sure we want to get into that match. But I do think that the reaction from the Israeli population and from many, many elements of Israeli society to the proposals for judicial change and for changing the legal system in Israel, I think have been very, very profound. And what happens now is going to be a matter for all kinds of discussion about how that can change. But I have to say that as a Canadian who spent a lot of my time involved in constitutional issues in Canada over many, many years, I feel intensely strongly that the most important principle of the rule of law is that no matter how powerful you are, no matter how rich you are, or how politically connected you are, the law is always above you. And when you try to meddle with that, look out, because I think what you're seeing in Israel now is a tremendously powerful reaction to that. But it's important, I think, to distinguish between the level of demonstration in favor of the current de facto constitution of Israel with respect to the rule of law, and the ongoing challenge of creating a better relationship with Palestine, with creating two states. My view is Canada was present at the creation of the state of Israel in the sense that we were supportive of that, but nothing that we did should take away from the fact that there's still an unanswered question, which is, what about Palestine? And we have to have an answer that says, we believe that the Palestinians should have their own state. We believe that state should be able to live within secure borders and boundaries next to the state of Israel. And we believe that the state has to be contiguous enough and able to take its place among the state of nations. The Palestinian Authority is represented at the UN as an observer. And I meet with the representative of the Palestinian Authority frequently. And again, I guess I was a student in high school during the 67, the 66 conflict. So I'm very, very this is a debate that I know well, and it's a debate where Canada needs to be clearer, I think, about what it means to say we favor a two-state
Right.
position. Because for a long time, we assumed that eventually the Israelis and Palestinians would sit down again and come to. I think we have to say that isn't going to happen unless we state more and more clearly what that means. It means that you can't keep having settlements that go beyond the borders and boundaries that have existed in the past, and you can't keep extending the military control. You can't have de facto annexations. You can't have that and have the basis for a two-state policy, because it's not happening. It used to be that there would be A, B, and C. We talk about different parts of it, how that would come. The Oslo Accords. It's important to remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu never supported the Oslo Agreement, and
Okay.
that's a challenge for us.
Okay. I want to squeeze in one last question because your watch is telling me we have 5
We
minutes.
have a few minutes.
Okay, good. When this government came into office in 2015, there was a lot of discussion about Canada being back on the world stage. By different metrics, there are critics who say that's not really the case. So I've got kind of a two-part question here. First, what aspect of Canada's leadership globally do you wish Canadians knew more about that you think is making a difference? But secondly, are you concerned about a mismatch between Canada's rhetoric, its values, its promises, and its follow-through, shall we say? And then I promise no more questions.
No, I think those are good questions. Let me start with the second one first. You say, am I concerned? I would say it's impossible not to be concerned about the need for us to be consistent in terms of the walk and the talk and the walk. And it's really important for us to, as a country, to understand. And that's part of what I was saying about the two states. We got to put some meat on those bones.
Some real ideas.
Yes, and really start to talk that through, as opposed to just talking what I would call in formulaic language
The rote answer.
from speaking notes. You notice that, hey, there's no notes. There's no.
Yeah.
I'm just speaking here. And I think it's really important for our political leaders for us all to understand that the world is watching and the world is calculating.
Yeah.
I mean, they know. I mean, a country X knows that your support for them has either gone up or gone down, or it's gone sideways, or it's not exactly on the ground as you said it would be. So these are things that we live with all the time, and it's really important for us to be consistent about that. I would, having said that, I would say though as well that when we look at something like, for example, the feminist foreign assistance policy, which has been announced by the government, we've been pretty strong about that. I mean, we've been very clear not only about the world that we're living in as a misogynist, patriarchal place in a lot of places, the terrible things that are happening in Afghanistan, the Iran conflict, but also in Uganda, you had recent recriminalization of sexual relationships between same-sex people. Just going backwards in so many ways, going back in time, and also trying to repress. And we've been very clear about that. Not only rhetorically clear, but also clear about saying, well, that's going to affect where and how we can spend our money and what we spend it on and how we allocate it. So I don't think we have anything to apologize for and regret. And I also think that when we look at things like early childhood marriage, we are a center of advocacy for the need to move forward on this question in a number of places and countries, which makes some countries uncomfortable, but and also other countries like Russia, for example, tries to take advantage of what they call Canada's woke position. Well, it's if you want to say it's woke to say that an 11-year-old girl should not be forced to get married to some 25-year-old guy that's been arranged. If you want to say it's woke for you to complain about that, you sort of say, well, I'm sorry, maybe it's woke. I don't care if you call it woke or not woke. It's not right.
It's wrong.
It's wrong. It's a wrong thing to do. And by the way, childhood under international law ends at age 18. So this is a reality of what we've all signed up for in terms of our commitments on international law. So I would say there's a consistent thread to what this government has tried to do that has been commendable and is being followed up by action. The challenge, however, is that when you look at the big levels of commitment that are required to deal with the kind of world that I've been describing, the inequality, the fact that some countries are falling back, the fact that many places of instability are growing, a number of countries facing serious financial liquidity problems, not just
On the precipice.
on the precipice, on the edge. And you say, this is going to require an even greater lifting from a number of countries. And I have to say that when other countries fall back, as they have done, Canada has moved steadily upwards. Now, has they moved as much upwards and as quickly as I would certainly like? No. And I mean, it's not a secret. I mean, I've made this statement on other occasions. We need to do more. And we also need to engage with Canadians about why we need to do more. And this perhaps is a good place for me to sort of conclude, because it's really where I started. The challenge that we still face is dealing with this kind of isolationist id, which is somewhere in the back here, the back of our sort of the crocodilian part of our anatomy, that keeps pushing us to say no when the call of the world comes, to say, please, can you help? You say, no, we're sorry, we've given enough. No, I don't want to do that. And in our own lives, we know this, right? You walk around the people who are homeless on the street. You don't pull out them. You don't figure out how the hell is that person going to. We've kind of become dull to these things. We dull ourselves from understanding the pain of the world, which is huge. And my view is you have to constantly go back and say, no, we have to figure out what can we do? What more can we do? How can we recommit? How can we re-engage? How do we stay as interested as we have to be? Because ultimately, we are an international country. We are a country that has been transformed by our own policies of immigration and acceptance. Over the years, we've become a much more international place than we ever were before. And that's something that personally I embrace completely. I think that's who we are as Canadians. And we are in this world. And I obviously feel it most intensely because of the job I do, because my daily job takes me face to face with people from all over the world who are presenting themselves as representatives of countries that we may not know very much about, but we'd better find out about them and find out what are the challenges and how can we engage. Doesn't mean we give up on saying, well, what are you doing to assist your own population, and why is your policy this way, and maybe if we change that would affect how things would go on. But it does mean that we have to be an engaged country. And the notion, as Neville Chamberlain put it, that we're never going to go to war for a country that's very far away and about which we know very little, which was his final peroration on why he signed the Munich Agreement, is not something we can say that's my model. No, we can't do that. Doesn't mean we have imperial ambitions. Really don't think we do have. It's not about that. Do we have the ambition of engagement, which is what's required. And I think that's really what this scholarship represents, and what the opportunities that are presented to students are really all about. And it's been a great pleasure and privilege to be with you this morning and to have an opportunity to share some time with you, and with you, Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I can only thank Ambassador Rae, but just it was fascinating to hear about your early story. And I would add, my father wasn't a diplomat, but my own interest in international politics was sparked by seeing Canadian leaders, particularly Trudeau the father, embracing global politics. One of my wishes is that people like Ambassador Rae, but others, are talking to Canadians much more about the threats that we face, about the world that we're living in. But I bet there are many young girls and boys all around Canada who, when they watch you in action, are similarly inspired, and I hope that they will have careers that answer the call of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rae. Thank you very much, Professor Welsh. I'd now like to call upon one of our scholars, Shirley Xuan Wang, to offer the formal thanks to our panelists.
All right, thank you, Professor Welsh and Ambassador Rae, for such an enriching conversation. I think everyone here, scholars included, have definitely an interest in global governance and all have this call of a world in the back of their mind, as you described. And so we look up to you so much, and we thank you so much for this conversation. Professor Welsh, thank you so much for being here and guiding the conversation. Obviously, she's so impressive. She's achieved so many things, and every time I speak to you, I feel that I've become smarter, and I think we've all felt that way today. But most importantly, she's one of the kindest people I've met in academia. She cares, and when you speak, she listens, and I really think that came through today. Personally, a lot of what I'm interested in right now can be traced back to the class that I took with her back in 2019. And I've told a lot of you that I want to be a prof one day, and I think a lot of that comes back to the example that Professor Welsh has set. And so I do credit a lot of why I'm here today to your mentorship and support over the years. And so with all that being said, I'm so grateful to have you with us today. And Ambassador Rae, thank you so much for explaining the state of the world to us and inspiring us to take our place in it. You've mentioned the importance of listening, not only when others come to you, but also reaching out to them. And also the importance of consequential thinking and of really walking the walk instead of just talking the talk. And I think for all of us here, we aspire to avoid that isolationist id that you mentioned, and to really take on that ambition of engagement. I think that's why we're all here and what we all look to do in the future. And so thank you so much for setting such a great example for us.